moment that looks tense without sound or explanation can mean something completely different once you understand the situation surrounding it. Meanwhile, basketball is one of the most emotional sports there is. Fast pace, constant pressure, split-second decisions, and emotions rise quickly during intense games. Players get frustrated. Coaches get frustrated. That's normal. Directed at the moment is not the same thing as internal conflict. But online, those lines often get blurred. Because social media thrives on drama, on intensity, on turning brief moments into major narratives. And once a clip starts trending, people naturally begin building stories around it. That's exactly what happened here. Some fans immediately framed the interaction as evidence of tension. Others pushed back, saying it was simply passion and competitiveness. And both sides used the same clip to support completely different interpretations. That's how powerful the sideline, that attention intensifies even more. But here's the key point, because moments like this happen constantly in sports. The difference is that most teams don't have cameras following every interaction this closely. Most teams don't generate this level of online discussion from a single sideline exchange. But the Fever are operating in a different environment now. An environment where attention magnifies everything. And that's part of what comes with having one of the most visible players in basketball. Meanwhile, fans continue trying to read between the lines, looking at body language, trying to determine what players and coaches are thinking in real time. But here's the reality. Competitive environments are emotional by nature. That emotion isn't always negative. Sometimes it reflects investment, urgency, a desire to win. And that's important to remember when moments like this go viral. Because intensity can look dramatic from the outside, even when it's completely normal inside the team environment. Meanwhile, the bigger story here might not be the interaction itself, but what it reveals about the spotlight surrounding this team. Because every moment now carries weight. Every game becomes a national conversation. Every emotional reaction turns into debate. And that's a sign of how much the WNBA spotlight has grown, especially around Indiana and Caitlin Clark. But here's where things start to shift again, because after the reaction phase comes perspective. Once emotions settle, people begin looking at the bigger picture, how the team is developing, how pressure affects communication, how emotional moments are part of building chemistry in competitive environments. And that's where the story becomes more complex than just a viral clip, because it's not really about one interaction. It's about what happens when pressure, visibility, and expectations all collide. And that's exactly what's happening here. Meanwhile, some fans are interpreting the interaction as evidence of growing frustration, not necessarily with each other, but with the pressure surrounding the season, the expectations, the constant scrutiny. Because right now, every game involving the Indiana Fever feels amplified. Every possession gets analyzed. Every result becomes a national discussion. And that creates tension naturally, not because something is wrong, but because the environment itself is intense. Meanwhile, others see the opposite. They see a competitive relationship forming, a player and coach demanding a high level from each other, pushing each other in real time, trying to figure out how to win under enormous expectations. And honestly, both interpretations can exist at the same time, because competitive sports are emotional, especially when the stakes feel this high. Meanwhile, Caitlin Clark continues operating under a spotlight unlike almost anyone else in the league. Every movement is watched. Every reaction becomes a headline. And that changes how moments are perceived. Because things that might go unnoticed on another team become massive conversations here. That's the reality of visibility. And it's one of the biggest adjustments players and coaches have to make in environments like this. Meanwhile, Stephanie White is also dealing with something unique. Because coaching a team with this level of public attention changes the entire job. It's not just about basketball anymore. It's about managing emotion, managing pressure, managing a team that exists under constant national attention. And that's not easy. Because every emotional sideline moment instantly becomes public content. Every conversation gets dissected. Every reaction gets interpreted. And that creates another layer of pressure on top of trying to win games. But here's the key point. Because emotional interactions between players and coaches are often part of successful teams. Not every disagreement is dysfunction. Not every emotional moment signals a problem. Sometimes it signals investment, intensity, standards being pushed higher. And that's something longtime athletes and coaches understand well. But online, nuance often disappears. Everything becomes simplified into good or bad, chemistry or conflict. And that's why moments like this spread so quickly, because they invite interpretation. Meanwhile, the broader WNBA conversation keeps expanding around these moments, because the league is experiencing something different right now. More visibility, more engagement, more people emotionally invested in every storyline. And that growth changes everything. It changes how games are covered, how players are discussed, how emotional moments are amplified far beyond the court itself. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. A brief sideline exchange turning into a league-wide conversation. But here's where things begin to shift again, because eventually the attention moves back to basketball itself, to performance, to results. Because no matter how viral a moment becomes, winning changes the conversation faster than anything else. If the fever continue improving, moments like this will eventually be viewed as part of the growing process, part of learning how to compete under pressure. But if struggles continue, then every emotional reaction gets magnified even more. And that's the reality of professional sports. Context changes perception. Results shape narratives. Meanwhile, fans are still debating every angle of the clip, trying to understand tone, intent, emotion. But the people actually involved? They're likely already focused on the next game, the next adjustment, the next opportunity to improve. Because that's how sports work internally. Moments happen fast. Emotions flare briefly. Then teams move forward. But outside the locker room, the conversation keeps going. And in today's sports world, those conversations can become almost as big as the games themselves. Fire. Now the conversation has officially reached another level, because what started as a brief sideline interaction has turned into a larger discussion about leadership, pressure, and expectations surrounding the Indiana Fever. And that's what happens when attention reaches this level. Small moments stop feeling small. Everything becomes symbolic. Everything becomes part of a bigger story. Meanwhile, fans are continuing to replay the interaction between Caitlin Clark and Stephanie White from every possible angle, trying to interpret body language, trying to understand emotion, trying to decide whether the moment reflected frustration, competitiveness, or simply the intensity of a difficult game situation. And that's the challenge with viral sports moments. Because once people begin attaching meaning to a clip, the conversation expands far beyond what actually happened. Meanwhile, pressure around this team continues to grow because expectations no longer small. This isn't a team quietly developing away from more. This is one of the most watched teams in basketball right now. Every game gets attention. Every performance becomes national discussion. And that creates an environment where emotions naturally become more visible, because pressure affects everyone differently. Players feel it, coaches feel it, even veterans feel it when the spotlight becomes this intense. Meanwhile, Caitlin Clark's position in all of this remains unique, because she isn't just handling normal rookie expectations. She's carrying the attention of an entire movement around women's basketball. Viewership, media attention, fan investment, all of it follows her into every arena. And that level of visibility creates emotional weight that most players never experience this early in their careers. But here's the important point, because emotional moments are not automatically negative. Sometimes they're signs of accountability, competitive urgency, standards being pushed higher. And successful teams often go through moments like this while figuring out how to compete together under pressure. Meanwhile, Stephanie White's role becomes even more important in environments like this. Because coaching isn't just strategy. It's emotional management,
The internet
communication,
is losing it after Cardi
balancing
B reportedly
personalities,
launched what fans are
expectations,
calling a
and
savage
pressure
revenge
all
move
at the
against
same
Stephon
time.
Diggs.
And when cameras are constantly focused on every reaction, that challenge becomes even bigger. But here's where things become really interesting,
internet
because the
is
public
losing it after
conversation
Cardi B
often sees
reportedly
emotion
launched what
differently
fans
than
are calling a
athletes
savage
do.
revenge move
Fans may
against Stephon
interpret
Diggs,
visible
and
frustration
social media
as
says
conflict,
nobody saw this
but
coming.
players and coaches
Yeah, after
often see
cheating
it as
rumors,
normal competition,
apologies, Super
as
Bowl drama,
passion,
public
as
humiliation,
investment in
and
winning.
non-stop
And
relationship
that
chaos.
difference
Critics
in
online
perspective
now believe
matters,
Cardi may have
because
finally
what looks
snapped
dramatic
publicly.
online
And according
may
to the
feel
internet,
completely
what happened
ordinary
next?
inside a competitive sports environment. Meanwhile, the Fever continue trying to establish identity under the spotlight. And that process is never perfectly smooth. Young teams make mistakes. Communication breaks down at times. Emotions rise during difficult stretches of games. That's part of growth, especially when expectations accelerate faster than the team's development timeline. And that's exactly what's happening here, because the attention around Indiana has grown so quickly that every normal challenge feels amplified. Every setback feels larger. Every emotional moment becomes content. And that creates a completely different environment than most teams experience. Meanwhile, fans continue debating whether moments like this help or hurt team chemistry. Some believe emotional intensity strengthens teams over time. Others believe public frustration creates unnecessary pressure. And honestly, there's truth in both perspectives depending on the situation. Because successful teams usually learn how to channel emotion productively. Not eliminate it completely, but direct it toward improvement rather than distraction. And that's likely what Indiana is still learning right now. How to function under extraordinary visibility while still growing as a team. But here's the key takeaway, because eventually, all the discussion returns to one thing: basketball itself. Performance, execution, results. Because no matter how viral a moment becomes, winning reshapes narratives faster than anything else. If the Fever continue improving, moments like this will eventually be remembered as growing pains, part of the process of building chemistry under pressure. But if struggles continue, then every emotional moment becomes part of a larger criticism. And that's the reality of sports at this level. Results influence interpretation. Meanwhile, the clip itself continues circulating online, generating debate far beyond the original moment. But inside the team environment, the focus is likely much simpler: adjustments, communication, preparation for the next game. Because that's how competitive sports work. The outside world keeps talking, but teams have to keep moving forward.
Fire.
Now, everything comes down to one thing: response. Because after the viral clip, after the reactions, after the endless debate across social media, the only thing that truly changes the conversation is what happens next. On the court, inside the locker room, within the way the Indiana Fever move forward from this moment. Because in professional sports, emotional moments are inevitable. Pressure creates emotion. Expectations create tension. Competition creates frustration. That's normal. What matters most is how teams respond afterward. And that's where all eyes are now focused regarding Caitlin Clark and Stephanie White. Meanwhile, fans are still split in how they view the interaction. Some believe it revealed growing frustration inside the team. Others see it as nothing more than competitive intensity in a difficult game situation. And honestly, sports history shows both possibilities can exist depending on the environment surrounding a team. But here's the key point: because isolated moments rarely tell the full story. What reveals the truth is consistency over time. How players interact moving forward. How the team performs. How communication looks in future situations under pressure. That's what actually matters. Not just one emotional exchange captured by cameras. Meanwhile, Caitlin Clark continues learning what it means to operate under constant national attention. And that adjustment is enormous. Because most young players develop away from this kind of spotlight. They make mistakes privately. They experience emotional moments without becoming headlines. Clark doesn't have that luxury. Every reaction becomes content. Every expression gets analyzed. And that creates emotional pressure that most athletes never experience this early. but it also accelerates growth. Because players in environments like this learn quickly. They adapt quickly. They develop resilience faster than most people realize. Meanwhile, Stephanie White is also managing something unique. Because coaching a highly visible young team requires balancing two worlds at once. The basketball side and the emotional side created by constant attention. Managing personalities. Managing expectations. Managing public narratives that grow from even the smallest moments. And that's not easy. Especially when every sideline interaction gets replayed millions of times online. But here's where perspective becomes important, because strong player-coach relationships are not always quiet or emotionless. In fact,